My name is Sienna, and I'm 29 years old, and the night they left me to walk home alone changed everything. My name is Sienna, and I'm 29 years old. I live in a small, quiet town just outside of Seattle, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and secrets don't stay hidden for long. For years, I believed I had the kind of friends who would always have my back. Cassie, Brielle, and Harper, my girls. We met in college and clicked instantly. We were the loud table in the cafeteria, the ones who took weekend trips just to escape reality, and the group that promised to stay close no matter how much life changed. I really thought those promises meant something. That Friday night started off like any other. Cassie suggested we try a new restaurant downtown, and everyone agreed. I was hesitant at first since my car had been acting up, but Harper immediately offered, "Don't worry, we'll give you a ride home." It was such a simple gesture, one that made me feel included, safe, even. I didn't realize how ironic that would sound a few hours later. We met at this cozy little place called Emberstone Candlelight, soft jazz, and laughter echoing from every table. The four of us ordered too much food, as usual, sharing appetizers and gossiping about our coworkers and relationships. Cassie was radiant that night, dressed to impress as she talked about her growing business. Harper kept flashing her engagement ring, glowing every time Liam's name came up. And Brielle, the quiet observer, sipped her wine and nodded at every story. I laughed with them, but there was a small part of me that always felt like the tag-along. Maybe because Cassie was always the leader, Harper the glamorous one, and Brielle the diplomat who kept peace between us all. Me? I was just there. The loyal one. The one who never said no. When the bill came, Cassie reached for it first. She loved being the one in control. We each paid our share, leaving a generous tip. I didn't think much of it when Cassie said, "We should get going soon. I have an early client meeting tomorrow." I nodded, finishing my drink while they stood to gather their things. Outside, the cool drizzle had turned into full-blown rain. I wrapped my scarf tighter, expecting them to wait for me. Cassie pulled out her keys, Harper opened her umbrella, and Brielle followed behind. They started heading toward Harper's car. I jogged to catch up. "Hey, you guys don't mind dropping me off, right?" I asked casually. Cassie paused for a second, her expression flickering with something unreadable. "Oh, Sienna, we thought you'd Uber or something. Harper's car's already packed." My stomach dropped. "Uber? It's storming and it's a 20-minute drive." Harper gave a helpless shrug. "Sorry, babe, we're already late." And just like that, they got into the car, closed the doors, and drove off, leaving me standing there under the flickering restaurant sign, rain pouring down my face. For a few seconds, I couldn't even move. I watched the red taillights fade into the night until they disappeared completely. I told myself to stay calm, that it wasn't a big deal. But the truth? It was. I wrapped my coat tighter, pulled my phone from my bag, 6% battery left. No chance of calling anyone. I sighed and started walking. The sound of my heels against the wet pavement echoed through the empty streets, each step heavier than the last. It wasn't just about walking home, it was the realization that the people I trusted most didn't care enough to make sure I got home safely. The rain soaked through my clothes, and my breath came out in shivers. At one point, I thought about ducking into a cafe or waiting it out under a bus stop, but something in me, maybe pride, kept me moving. By the time I reached my apartment, I was drenched, exhausted, and furious. My phone died just as I unlocked my door. Inside, I changed into dry clothes and stared at my reflection in the mirror. My hair clung to my face, mascara smudged, but it wasn't the rain that stung my eyes. It was betrayal. I grabbed my phone charger and plugged it in, waiting for the screen to light up. The group chat was still active. Cassie had sent a selfie of the three of them in the car with the caption, "Girls' night done right," followed by Harper's laughing emoji. I typed, "You left me behind in the rain." A few seconds later, Cassie replied, "We thought you'd Uber." Harper added, "You're always so independent, Sienna. We figured you were fine." Fine. The word burned. I didn't respond again. I turned off the phone, crawled into bed, and stared at the ceiling for hours. My body was still trembling, not from the cold anymore, but from anger. That night, something inside me shifted. I realized that friendship built on convenience isn't friendship at all. It's just people using you until they don't need you. The next morning, I woke up with a headache and swollen eyes. The rain had stopped, but inside, the storm hadn't. None of them called. Not one message checking if I made it home. As I made coffee, I looked out the window at the soaked streets below. I thought about all the times I'd dropped everything for them, babysitting Harper's dog, helping Cassie with business flyers, comforting Brielle through her breakup. All of it suddenly felt meaningless. They didn't leave me behind because they forgot. They left me because they didn't care. I took a sip of coffee, staring at the phone lighting up with more messages, brunch plans, memes, idle chatter. I ignored them all. That walk home didn't just end a friendship, it ignited something much deeper, something I didn't even know I was capable of feeling. That walk home felt longer than any road I had ever taken in my life. What started as a 20-minute walk became a nightmare I'll never forget. That night haunted me for weeks. The sound of rain hitting the pavement, the dim streetlights flickering overhead, the echo of my own footsteps, every detail burned into my memory. I remember the smell of wet asphalt, the cold biting through my coat, and the sinking realization that I wasn't just walking home. I was walking away from people I thought cared about me. What should have been a quick 20-minute walk turned into a nightmare that still chills me when I think about it. Halfway home, my phone's battery icon blinked red. I held it close, trying to get enough light to see the cracked sidewalk beneath my feet. The wind picked up, howling between the empty buildings. Every shadow felt alive. I told myself not to panic, but my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it. Then, a car slowed beside me. Its headlights flooded over me, blinding in the rain. My breath caught. The window rolled down halfway, and a man's voice called out, "You need a ride?" I froze, clutching my purse tighter. "No, I'm fine," I said, forcing my voice not to shake. The car idled for a moment, engine humming low, before speeding off. I didn't breathe until the sound faded completely. After that, I picked up my pace, my shoes sloshing through puddles. A group of men stood near a corner store smoking under the awning. One of them looked up as I passed, his eyes following me. I could feel their gaze on my back. My pulse quickened. I didn't look back. I just kept walking. Every step felt like a lifetime. When I finally saw my apartment building in the distance, I almost cried with relief. My legs ached, and my clothes were soaked through. By the time I reached my door, I could barely hold the key steady enough to unlock it. The second I stepped inside, I locked the door, leaned against it, and slid down until I was sitting on the floor, shaking. I'd never felt so small, so forgotten, so disposable. I stripped off my wet clothes, tossed them in the hamper, and wrapped myself in a blanket. The silence of my apartment was deafening. Outside, thunder rolled, echoing like laughter. I kept replaying the night in my head, over and over. The part where Cassie smiled as she said, "We thought you'd Uber." The way Harper didn't even look back. The way Brielle avoided my eyes. When my phone finally powered back on, I checked my messages. Nothing. Not a single "Did you get home safe?" Not one apology. I typed, "Thanks for leaving me stranded." A few minutes later, Cassie replied, "Oh, come on, Sienna. Don't be dramatic. You're fine." Fine. That word again. Harper sent, "We didn't mean to, you know how crazy parking was." Then, as if to twist the knife deeper, she added a laughing emoji. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. "You thought it was funny?" I typed back, but I didn't send it. What was the point? They wouldn't understand. They never did. I tossed my phone aside and curled up on the couch. Every drop of rain that hit the window felt like a reminder that I was completely alone. I told myself it didn't matter, that I'd get over it. But deep down, something had cracked. It wasn't just hurt, it was anger. A quiet, simmering anger that whispered, "They need to learn." The next morning, I dragged myself to work, exhausted. My coworkers joked about the storm last night, but I barely heard them. My mind was still stuck, replaying every moment. When I opened social media, there they were, Cassie, Harper, and Brielle, posting pictures from after they left me. Smiling, dry, and warm inside Harper's car. The caption read, "Girls' night success, love my ride or dies." Ride or dies. The irony almost made me laugh. I scrolled past their posts, but something inside me hardened. That was the moment I knew things would never go back to how they were. Over the next few days, Cassie called a few times, acting like nothing had happened. I ignored her. She sent a text that said, "You're not still mad, are you?" I didn't respond. The silence seemed to make her uncomfortable, and that pleased me more than I expected. A week later, Brielle invited me for coffee, saying, "Let's clear the air." I went, curious to see how far their guilt would go. She looked uneasy, stirring her latte endlessly before saying, "They didn't mean it, Sienna. You know how Cassie gets, she doesn't think sometimes." I leaned back, my tone calm. "You were there too, Brielle. You could have said something." She looked down, cheeks flushing. "I know," she whispered. "I'm sorry. It wasn't enough." A sorry after laughter doesn't erase betrayal. I nodded, pretending to accept it, but my mind was elsewhere. Something in me had shifted permanently. I was done being the dependable one, the one who forgave too easily. I went home that day and sat by my window, watching people rush through the rain outside. I wondered if Cassie or Harper ever thought twice about that night. Probably not. They'd already moved on, convinced I'd get over it. But I wasn't going to get over it. I was going to get even. I didn't know how yet, but I knew one thing for certain. If they could leave me to walk alone that night, I could make sure they'd one day walk alone too. Not through rain, but through something far worse, loss. The kind that stripped away everything they valued. I told myself I wouldn't act out of spite. This wasn't about petty revenge. It was about balance, justice. Making them understand what it feels like to be left behind. Unseen, unprotected. I closed my eyes that night and pictured their faces when they realized what they'd done, when they finally understood that betrayal always circles back. That's when I decided they needed to understand how betrayal really feels. My revenge didn't start with anger, it started with opportunity. After that night, I kept my distance, but I didn't cut them off completely. I'm not the kind of person who storms out and burns bridges on impulse. I'm quieter, more deliberate. I let the hurt sit and simmer while I watched. A week after the rain incident, Cassie messaged me asking if I could help with something for her design agency. She had a big investor pitch and needed a fresh branding deck. It felt like a test and, for reasons I couldn't fully explain, I said yes. I told myself I was being the bigger person. The truth was, I wanted a vantage point. When we met at a coffee shop a few days later, Cassie hugged me like nothing had happened and slid a laptop across the table. "I need your eye on this," she said, smiling that practiced smile that both reassured and irked me. She handed me a login to a shared drive and a folder labeled Investor Pitch Q3. Inside were mood boards, financial summaries, and a dozen spreadsheets. Harper chimed in about how proud she was of the progress and how excited Liam was to finally commit. They talked numbers like it was an inevitability. They didn't see the cracks. I did. As I opened document after document, I felt a strange clarity. Business documents reveal habits, how someone manages money, how they excuse things, where they hide inconvenient truths. I skimmed a file marked expense reports and my stomach turned. There were invoices with vendors I'd never heard of and amounts that didn't line up with the services described. Another spreadsheet showed transfers labeled as consulting fees that went to a name I recognized from Cassie's boutique marketing account. I downloaded copies, careful to rename and store them in a private folder on my laptop. I wasn't sure yet what I had, but I knew it was something. Over the next few weeks, I positioned myself as indispensable. I redesigned their pitch, rewrote taglines, and created visuals that made their projections look seamless. I brought my best work and wrapped it in a smile because showing anger would only make me obvious. Cassie loved the new look. She said it felt elevated and investor-ready. Harper hugged me, thanking me for saving them the stress. Brielle made small talk and never once probed. They all assumed I was just being kind. They didn't know I was learning the layout of their trust. The more access I had, the more the inconsistencies piled up. There were duplicate invoices with tiny changes in dates and amounts, checks sent to shell companies, and a pattern of reimbursements that lined certain pockets. Harper's faith in Cassie seemed complete. She spoke glowingly about how Cassie handled the finances because she was too busy with relationships and trusted her completely. That trust gnawed at me because I remembered how easily they'd abandoned me when trusting would have cost them 30 minutes and a ride. I also learned about Liam Harper's fiancé and how he had put a significant chunk of his savings into Cassie's venture. They called him their silent partner and praise-sang his patience. That bit of information felt like fuel. If I could show the truth to the person who had the most to lose, it would force consequences that couldn't be laughed off at brunch. I started saving copies of transfers and highlighted the ones that directly tied back to Harper's account. I carefully exported emails that showed approval for certain consultants that matched the shell companies. Each piece felt like a puzzle that, when assembled, would reveal the whole picture. I never acted rashly. I recorded nothing illegally. I simply archived the documents they trusted me to view. I learned how to read their language, the euphemisms and the lines they used to cushion uncomfortable numbers. Cassie used phrases like strategic reallocations and contractual flex that, in my hands, looked a lot like deliberate misdirection. Harper's language was softer. I didn't see it. I thought it was fine. She promised she'd fix it. Those phrases became my map. While I was collecting, I also cultivated innocence. I showed up early to meetings, offered to proofread contracts, and spent late nights perfecting slides. Cassie started relying on me for last-minute fixes. Harper texted me gratitude for stepping in. None of them suspected that the person smoothing their edges was quietly gathering the evidence that would bring those edges crashing down. I told myself it wasn't about revenge alone, it was about righting an imbalance, about teaching them a lesson they wouldn't forget. There were moments, small, human moments, when empathy tugged at me. I remembered nights they'd cried to me about their own fears, times I'd sat up making tea while they argued over petty things. But each memory of their kindness was outweighed by that night in the rain. Each time I replayed their laughter while I walked home soaked, the resolve hardened. I wasn't trying to ruin lives indiscriminately. I wanted them to face what they'd done, to feel the weight of being left behind. I continued to collect, to save, and to wait for the right opening. I watched how their partnership functioned and where it buckled. I learned their rhythms and their blind spots. Opportunity reveals itself when you're patient enough to notice it, and I had all the patience in the world now. And that's when I realized I could hit them where it truly hurt, their pockets. They thought I was just helping, but I was studying every move they made. I settled into a rhythm that felt almost pleasant in its predictability. Show up, do the work, smile when praised, leave with a file copied into a private folder. I learned how Cassie organized her documents, how she named drafts, where she kept receipts and who she emailed for approvals. I learned that people leave breadcrumbs when they're careless. They don't realize that habit becomes a map for the person who's paying attention. I never hacked anything or broke into accounts. I simply used the access they freely granted me because I was helping out. It felt like poetry using their trust against them without them ever suspecting the author of the lines. I opened the shared drive on my laptop and navigated it the way I'd learned to navigate family photo albums. Gently, with an eye for the things that didn't belong. On a Tuesday evening, while redesigning a slide deck, I clicked into a folder labeled Q3 Expenses Final. Inside, some spreadsheets looked ordinary, but a couple had hidden rows with odd vendor names and duplicated invoice numbers. I highlighted them and exported copies to my private folder, renaming files so they'd be easy to reference later. When Cassie emailed me new logo variants, she attached PDFs and also embedded a zipped folder with contract attachments. I saved that zipped folder too. Each download felt like adding another grain to a pile that would someday become impossible to ignore. I taught myself the vocabulary of their deception. Cassie wrote strategic disbursement where a normal person would write payment. Harper approved advisory fees that actually returned to Cassie's personal account. Brielle forwarded messages with the casual neutrality of someone who didn't understand accounting but knew enough to feel uncomfortable. I printed nothing. Physical evidence could be traced back to me. I kept everything digital, stored on an encrypted folder, organized by date and by the names of accounts involved. I learned to take screenshots at odd angles so timestamps wouldn't be obvious if someone ever glanced over my shoulder. When Brielle began to fidget in meetings, glancing between her phone and the presenters, I felt a sliver of panic. She sent me a text one afternoon. "Are you still mad about that night?" I replied with a tiny lie. "I'm over it." The message, thread, should have been proof of reconciliation. Instead, it was another camera lens through which I watched them. Cassie started including me in last-minute edits because she trusted my taste and my speed. She would hand me files and say, "Can you clean this up? Investors won't wait." I would open the files, tidy the typography, and while I was at it, I'd extract a few spreadsheets and email threads that hinted at reimbursements that didn't add up. Harper trusted Cassie with money the way she trusted her with secrets. She believed Cassie when she said things like, "It's all under control," and "Trust me, Liam will be pleased." That blind trust made the betrayal sting twice. Once for leaving me in the rain, and again for watching someone else be taken advantage of because she refused to look. I kept my notes meticulous. Every suspicious transaction had a screenshot, an email header, and a note about why it looked wrong. I mapped how money flowed from investor accounts into business accounts and then into smaller transfers labeled as consulting or vendor fees. The pattern emerged slowly but clearly: money leaving their company and landing in places that benefited Cassie, sometimes through shell entities with names that mimicked legitimate vendors. I cross-checked dates with event calendars and investor communications, so the timeline couldn't be dismissed as a mix-up. Meanwhile, my outward demeanor was the perfect mask. I stayed late at their office one night, tying up the final touches on a presentation while they left to grab dinner. I offered to stay and upload the files. Cassie lingered by my desk, chatting about client calls, unaware I was copying a folder called Invoice Reconciliations. She laughed about something Brielle said, and I laughed too. The sound easy and untroubled. I made sure to be visible as the helpful friend, the professional who rescued them from last-minute chaos. I brought them coffee on mornings when meetings started early and proofread emails with an indifferent flourish that pleased Cassie. That perceived loyalty was my greatest asset. It let me move freely through their world without raising suspicion. There were moments of doubt, particularly when I saw Harper's face lighting up while she read a message from Liam about finalizing his transfer. I knew how much that investment meant to her. I told myself I wasn't destroying anything out of cruelty. I was revealing what already existed. If exposure hurt, it would be because the truth had weight. One rainy afternoon at the office, Brielle pulled me aside and said, "Be careful with what you dig into." Her voice trembled, as if she suspected what I knew but didn't want to admit it. I smiled and said, "I'm just doing my job." My smile hid the fact that I had already planned how to use the files when the moment was right. That moment arrived sooner than I expected. Cassie messaged me late that night. "Can you take our proposal and give it the final polish? Investors are reviewing tomorrow and I need the clean copy." I answered, calm and casual, but my heart kicked hard because I could smell the opening in the air. The real setup began when Cassie asked me to redesign their proposal. It was a Thursday night when Cassie called, her voice full of that false charm I'd learned to recognize too well. "Sienna, I need a favor." "Again," she said, laughing lightly, as if we were still those carefree college friends who'd do anything for each other. She explained that the investor pitch deck needed a total glow-up, and she trusted no one else but me to make it happen. The meeting was in 2 days, which meant I'd have one night to rebuild everything from scratch. I told her yes. I said it smoothly, like a friend eager to help, but inside, I smiled for an entirely different reason. The setup was finally unfolding. She sent me her laptop files through a shared drive, complete with her financial statements, contracts, and presentation slides. As I opened them, my plan crystallized. There were 2 stories buried in those documents: the glossy lie Cassie wanted the investors to see, and the ugly truth I'd been collecting in secret. I decided to show both. I would create 2 versions of the same proposal, one pristine, one poisonous. I started by cleaning up her layout, refining her branding, updating colors, and fixing minor details that made the presentation look professional. This version was safe, predictable, the one Cassie expected. Then I duplicated the entire folder and began crafting version 2. This one looked identical on the surface but had embedded details that no one could ignore once they saw them. I pulled data from the hidden invoices I'd saved, inserting them neatly into the financial overview slides. The figures exposed every unauthorized transaction Cassie had made, the consulting fees that didn't exist, the duplicated payments, and the funneling of Harper's investment money into Cassie's personal projects. The proof was undeniable, presented in the same tone Cassie herself had written, confident, clean, and formatted to perfection. I labeled the first file Pitch Final and the second Pitch Reviewed Final. Both looked harmless enough, but I knew Cassie's habits. She was careless, especially under pressure. She'd always open the most recent file without double-checking. It was the same flaw that made her comfortable committing fraud in plain sight. By morning, both files were uploaded to her shared drive. I left her a quick text. "All done. You're ready to impress them." She replied with 3 heart emojis and a, "You're a lifesaver." I smiled, imagining the irony of her words. The next day, Cassie, Harper, and Brielle gathered at the investor meeting while I stayed behind, pretending to work remotely. I watched the clock, heart thudding slow and steady. Around noon, I got a group message from Harper, "Wish us luck," followed by Cassie's confident, "We've got this." I stared at my phone, knowing exactly what they were walking into. I pictured the scene vividly, the sleek conference room, Cassie's wide smile as she connected her laptop to the projector, the investors' polite nods as the first slides appeared. I imagined Harper sitting proudly beside her, thinking this was the day they'd secure funding and expand their business. I knew the exact moment the tone in the room would change right when the financial breakdown slide appeared. Later that afternoon, I got a call from Brielle. Her voice was trembling. "Sienna, what just happened?" she whispered. I could hear chaos in the background, people talking, chairs scraping. "Cassie sent the wrong file," she said. "The investors saw everything, every fake expense, every suspicious transfer." Harper's screaming at her. "They're saying she stole from the company." I let my breath catch, feigning shock. "What? How?" I asked, making my voice small and disbelieving. "She must have uploaded the wrong version." Brielle sounded near tears. "The lawyers were there, Sienna. They're demanding documentation. Harper looks like she's about to collapse." "I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding," I said gently, knowing full well it wasn't. An hour later, Harper called me directly. Her voice was sharp, brittle with anger. "Did you have anything to do with this?" she snapped. I kept my tone calm, measured. "What are you talking about?" "The presentation had all these transactions under my name, money I never approved. Cassie said it must have been a mistake, but I don't believe her." "I didn't touch any financial slides," I said truthfully, because technically, I hadn't created new ones, I had simply revealed the truth that was already there. She exhaled shakily. "I think she's been lying to me for months." I stayed silent for a beat before saying softly, "Maybe it's time to look closer." By evening, the story had spread across our local business community. Cassie's name was buzzing in whispers and emails. Clients started pulling out of her projects, and the investor group postponed their deal indefinitely. Harper deleted all her promotional posts. Cassie sent me a frantic text, "Everything's falling apart, can you meet me?" I met her at a cafe near her office that night. Her eyes were red, mascara streaked. She clutched her coffee cup like a lifeline. "I don't understand what happened," she said. "One minute I'm presenting, the next they're accusing me of theft. The slides had numbers I never put there." I looked at her evenly. "Cassie, you handle all the finances. Maybe someone noticed discrepancies." She shook her head violently. No one could have seen that data. It was private." I raised an eyebrow. "Maybe it wasn't as private as you thought." Her face crumpled, panic overtaking her arrogance for the first time. "Harper's threatening to sue. I swear I didn't mean for any of this to happen." I sipped my drink slowly. "Sometimes," I said, "we don't realize the damage we've done until it's too late." Cassie stared at me blankly, as if trying to decode whether I meant more than what I said. When I left the cafe, the air felt lighter, almost electric. I walked through the drizzle with my umbrella open, the same way I had that night months ago, only this time, I wasn't the one left behind. I sat in the back, pretending to be shocked, while knowing I had just cracked their empire. The fallout began faster than I expected. The day after the disastrous investor meeting, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Missed calls, unread messages, and a few voicemails, all from Cassie, Harper, and Brielle. It was chaos. I ignored them at first, letting their panic stew. I wanted to see how they'd react when their perfect world started to collapse in on itself. It didn't take long. By the afternoon, I saw the first cracks appear publicly. Cassie's company page quietly took down its partnership announcement post, and Harper changed her relationship status from engaged to it's complicated. I didn't even have to lift a finger. They were doing the unraveling all by themselves. When I finally answered Cassie's 10th call, her voice came through hoarse and broken. "Sienna, please. You were there. You saw what happened. They think I'm a thief." She sounded desperate, stripped of the confidence that used to fill every room she walked into. I took a breath before answering. "Cassie, what did you expect? Those numbers looked bad. I told you to double-check your files." "I didn't make those slides," she cried. "Someone tampered with them." I let silence stretch for a moment. Are you sure about that? Because Harper said the investors had been asking for those reports for weeks. Cassie's sobs caught in her throat. I swear I didn't do anything wrong, she said weakly. But the tremor in her voice betrayed her own doubt. Later that evening, I got a message from Harper. We need to talk. Please don't tell Cassie I called. That alone told me everything. The alliance between them was gone. I agreed to meet her at a small diner off Main Street. When I arrived, Harper looked exhausted. Her makeup couldn't hide the dark circles under her eyes. I don't even know where to start, she muttered, pushing a cup of untouched coffee back and forth between her hands. Cassie swears she's innocent, but those numbers, they were in her files. The money left the business account in transactions she approved. I tilted my head. You had access too, didn't you? She hesitated, glancing down. Only for oversight. I never touched the actual transfers. I nodded slowly. Then if you didn't do it and she didn't do it, who did? She looked at me, panic flickering in her eyes. You think someone set her up? I think someone finally stopped covering up her mess, I said softly, her jaw clenched. If she did steal from us, I'll make sure she pays for it. I didn't have to say a word. The wedge between them had already taken root. I could see it in Harper's expression, the betrayal, the confusion, the need for someone to blame. She wanted Cassie to suffer for embarrassing her, and Cassie wanted someone to validate her innocence. They were mirrors of each other, and both were cracking. The next few days were a blur of whispered accusations and public silence. Cassie started losing clients fast. Word spread that she'd been dishonest with investors. Harper's engagement to Liam started showing signs of strain. People noticed that Liam stopped liking her posts and unfollowed Cassie's business page altogether. Brielle, ever the peacekeeper, tried to calm everyone down, but even she couldn't stop the storm. At one point, Brielle texted me, "They're both losing it. Cassie's blaming Harper. Harper's threatening to get lawyers involved. I think they're going to drag you into it too." I stared at the message, then typed back. I've got nothing to hide. That was true. Every file, every accident, every action of mine had been calculated to look like simple coincidence. I was invisible, the helpful friend, the one who stayed out of drama. Cassie called again that night, this time her tone more frantic than before. Harper's accusing me of stealing from her, she said. She's saying I funneled her money into personal accounts. That's insane. I didn't do that. You need to calm down, I said gently. What are you going to do? She wants to bring in auditors. Sienna, if they look into my accounts, she stopped short, her breath catching. I mean, they'll see some inconsistencies, but nothing serious. I leaned against my window, watching raindrops slide down the glass. Cassie, if you didn't do anything wrong, you have nothing to worry about. I can't lose everything, she whispered. You know how hard I've worked for this. I could have comforted her. I could have told her it would blow over. But I didn't. Instead, I said, then you should have been more careful. After that, she stopped calling. The silence was almost peaceful. Harper, on the other hand, started reaching out more frequently, venting her frustrations in long messages about betrayal and reputation. She told me Liam was furious and wanted to pull out of the partnership entirely. I listened, offering sympathetic words and the occasional, "You'll get through this." But I didn't mean it. I wanted her to feel every ounce of humiliation I'd felt that night. They left me stranded in the rain. Then came the news that Harper had officially filed a fraud claim against Cassie's company. The announcement hit local business circles within hours, and the fallout was immediate. Clients withdrew, investors demanded refunds, and Cassie's accounts were frozen pending review. Everything she'd built, all the control she once held, was crumbling in real time. The irony wasn't lost on me. Cassie had spent years manipulating numbers to make herself look successful, and now those very numbers were her undoing. Harper texted me one final time that week. It's over. She's finished. You were right, I should have seen it sooner. I typed back. I'm sorry it came to this. It was a lie, but a convincing one. I deleted the message after sending it, not because I regretted it, but because the satisfaction I felt was enough. Cassie's empire had fallen. Harper's confidence was shattered, and Brielle's neutrality had been tested beyond repair. They had left me alone once, and now, each of them was standing alone, just like I had that night in the rain. I wasn't done until they knew exactly why this happened. For the first time, they turned against each other instead of me. The collapse I'd engineered, or rather, the collapse I'd revealed, didn't look like any dramatic movie scene. It was quieter, uglier. Whispers in hallways, curt emails, fingers pointed in coffee shops. The alliance that had felt unbreakable for years cracked along a seam I'd been watching for months. Cassie blamed Harper for not reading the statements more carefully. Harper blamed Cassie for making decisions behind her back. Brielle, who had always tried to smooth the edges, suddenly looked like the only person left trying to hold together a car that was already falling off a cliff. I watched them in the slow-motion way of someone who has sat back long enough to see patterns become consequences. They argued in public and private, in texts and in conference rooms. Cassie sent frantic emails to anyone who would listen, calling the situation a total misunderstanding and begging for calm. Harper forwarded those emails to Liam with highlighted passages and an annotation. "Do you see this? She lied to me." Liam's replies were terse and clinical. He asked for documentation, for proof, for a clear paper trail. He was no longer the supportive fiancé who posted gushy captions. He was a man protecting his investment. That shift did more damage than any rumor ever could. Brielle tried to mediate at first, meeting with both of them separately as if proximity could stitch things back together. "We're friends," she told me once, voice small. "This should be fixable." I nodded and kept my face neutral, because the last thing I wanted was for her to suspect I'd been quietly nudging the dominoes. Their conversations turned nastier as money and pride colluded. Cassie accused Harper of being naive and gullible, of handing over control to someone who didn't know how to run a business. Harper accused Cassie of hubris and theft, of turning the company into a personal piggy bank. Each accusation dug the wedge deeper. Each retort widened the distance between them. Friends chose sides. Some people texted me with soft sympathy. Others sent thinly veiled congratulations. People I thought I knew revealed loyalties based on opportunity rather than history. In group chats, people that had posted brunch photos days earlier started sending links to accounting resources and articles about fiduciary duty. The entire thing became a morality play, and no one was innocent. I felt a strange mix of vindication and nausea as I watched reputations be rewritten. It wasn't enough that Cassie lost investors. She lost the narrative she'd cultivated for years, the competent, fearless leader. Harper didn't simply lose money. She lost the ability to trust her own judgment and the trust of the man she loved. Brielle froze in the middle, trying to be the good friend while also defending herself against guilt by association. I had expected them to turn on me at some point, to look for the convenient scapegoat, but instead they tore each other apart as if domestic heartbreak were the only acceptable outlet. I began to receive private messages from people who used to nod approvingly at Cassie's business acumen. "Did you always suspect something?" one asked. "I never thought she'd stoop that low," another typed. People began to piece together moments they'd previously ignored. Unexplained trips, postponed invoices, consultants who never returned calls. Those crumbs, magnified by the investor fallout, painted a picture too ugly to deny. Cassie lashed out in increasingly desperate ways. She attempted to call meetings, to present corrected ledgers, to name vendors and explain transfers. But each attempt only revealed more, the paperwork she hadn't thought to falsify, more small lies that created a mosaic of deceit. Harper, paradoxically, became more ruthless with each betrayal she discovered. She demanded audits, signed affidavits, and pushed for legal counsel. Watching her harden into someone who could bury warmth for the sake of self-preservation made my stomach twist. She was no longer the girl who'd left the windows down in our cars and cried over rom-coms. She was someone tempered by loss and furious at the vanity that had cost her so much. Brielle texted me less and less. When we did speak, she sounded hollow, like a mediator who'd exhausted every conciliatory argument. Once, over coffee, she said, "People show who they are when stakes are high." I let that hang between us. I let her feel the silence of my agreement. The town took sides too, and the social consequences were immediate. Invitations stopped arriving for Cassie. Clients who had once bragged about her work quietly wiped her name from their vendors' lists. Harper's family became a pressure cooker, with relatives whispering about the engagement and whether Liam should sever ties entirely. The pressure made them brittle. Each time they met, it seemed they came armed not with explanations but with accusations. I kept my distance physically and emotionally. I answered Harper's messages with measured concern and Cassie's pleas with cool detachment. Neither could accuse me of instigating because I had never done anything overtly hostile. I'd allowed the truth to sit in plain sight and watched as it did what truth always does: force accountability. Sometimes, late at night, I thought about calling Brielle and telling her everything about how I'd collected the files, about the careful way I'd shaped the presentation that cracked them open. Then I remembered sitting in that puddle of rain, watching taillights fade, and I kept my mouth shut. Their nails were now bared at each other instead of at me, and that alone felt like its own quiet justice. People kept asking me if I felt guilty. I told them I didn't. The ache in me had shifted from wanting them to hurt to wanting them to understand the cost of their casual cruelty. The battle between Cassie and Harper was messy and public, and it taught everyone around them a lesson about trust and hubris. In the end, they were forcing wounds open that only one of them, or perhaps no one, could properly dress. They were breaking apart beautifully, but I still had one more truth to deliver. The truth always lands hardest when it comes from a trusted voice. In the weeks that followed their fallout, the silence between Cassie and Harper became deafening. I could feel the tension ripple through our social circles, every whispered conversation laced with suspicion and half-truths. The two of them avoided each other in public, and when they did cross paths, it was through clenched jaws and cold stares. I stayed on the periphery, watching everything quietly, the perfect picture of a neutral friend who only wanted peace. But inside, I was calculating my final move. It came one night when I was cleaning up my laptop folders. Among the dozens of saved files, I found something I hadn't paid much attention to before: the original financial documents Cassie had tried to bury. The proof wasn't just of her theft. It revealed Harper's blind trust and the way she'd signed off on things she didn't understand. I stared at those documents for a long time, and then I realized something. Harper didn't need more rumors. She needed the truth, and it needed to come from someone she still believed in. I knew how to play that role well. The next day, I sent Harper a message that simply said, "I think there's something you should see. Meet me, just us." She replied within minutes, agreeing to meet that evening. We chose a quiet cafe downtown, far from where anyone might overhear us. She arrived early, her expression tight, her hair pulled back like she was holding herself together by a thread. When I sat down, she didn't waste time. "You said you had something to show me," she said, her voice sharp. I opened my laptop and slid it across to her. "You trusted Cassie?" I began softly. "But I think you should see where that trust went." Her eyes darted over the screen as I opened a folder labeled Invoices, Q3. Each document spoke for itself: fake vendors, duplicated charges, redirected payments. I didn't need to say much. The numbers told the story better than I ever could. Harper's hand went to her mouth, her face draining of color. "She used my name on these transfers," she whispered. "Those accounts, they aren't even real businesses." I nodded slowly. "She told investors you approved every single one." For a long moment, Harper said nothing. The cafe noise faded into the background, replaced by the sound of her controlled breathing. When she finally spoke, her voice was small but steady. "I'm going to press charges." I met her eyes. "You should." She looked at me then, searching for something in my face: remorse, validation, maybe even loyalty. "You're sure about all of this?" she asked. "Yes," I said firmly. "I've seen everything." By the time we parted, Harper's mind was set. She wasn't going to confront Cassie with emotions. She was going to confront her with law. And that, I knew, would be the final nail in Cassie's coffin. The following week was chaos. Harper's lawyer sent a formal complaint to Cassie, demanding an audit and repayment of all misused funds. When Cassie received it, she called me immediately, panicked, sobbing and furious. "She's suing me!" she screamed through the phone. "Harper's suing me. She's saying I forged documents that I stole from her." I made my voice sound appropriately shocked. "What? Cassie, that's insane. How could she think that?" "I don't know," she cried. "She has files, copies of invoices. She says they're proof I falsified them." I paused. "Did you ever give her access to those files?" "No," she said quickly, then hesitated. Unless maybe I sent her something by accident? I don't know. Maybe someone else did," I murmured, keeping my tone low and sympathetic. Cassie was unraveling. Every conversation we had after that sounded more desperate. She started blaming Brielle for leaking information, accusing her of siding with Harper. But Brielle barely wanted to be involved anymore. She was done being their referee. Meanwhile, Harper grew colder, more focused. Her lawyer moved fast, requesting bank records and transaction trails. Within days, Cassie's accounts were frozen pending review. Her company halted operations, clients fled, and the name she'd spent years building was now synonymous with fraud. I watched from a distance as Cassie's life came apart, piece by piece. Her social media disappeared, her phone went to voicemail, and people who used to praise her wouldn't even say her name aloud anymore. I could have felt pity, but I didn't. I remembered the smirk she wore that night in the rain, the laughter in the car as they left me standing there. Now, she was the one standing alone. When Harper texted me, her tone was sharp but grateful. "Thank you for being honest with me. If you hadn't shown me those files, I'd still be protecting her." I typed back, "You deserve to know the truth." It was the only message between us that felt completely genuine. As for Cassie, her final message to me came a week later. "I know you told her. You ruined everything." I stared at it for a long time before replying, "No, Cassie. You ruined everything when you lied." After that, I blocked her number. I didn't need to see the aftermath in detail. I already knew how it would end. Cassie's silence became her confession. Harper reclaimed her name, her money, and her sense of control. And me? I stayed in the background, calm, detached, watching the dust settle. The story had come full circle, but I knew it wasn't quite over. Because sometimes, when justice finally takes shape, it reveals more than you expected. But karma wasn't finished. It had one last stop before justice was complete. Harper wasn't as innocent as she pretended to be. For a while, I thought I was done. Cassie had lost everything: her company, her friends, her reputation. Harper, on the other hand, had positioned herself as the victim of Cassie's deceit, the wronged business partner who had been misled. People pitied her. They called her brave for standing up for herself. They said she was resilient, admirable, even forgiving. At first, I let them talk. I let Harper bask in that sympathy. But deep down, something about it didn't sit right with me. Because if Cassie had been corrupt, Harper had been complicit. She might not have orchestrated the fraud, but she'd turned a blind eye to it, and I had the evidence to prove it. One night, I was sorting through old folders when I noticed a set of files I hadn't opened yet. They weren't from Cassie's drive. They were from Harper's shared folder, back when I was helping them streamline business operations. I clicked through, expecting nothing more than standard documentation, contracts, invoices, the usual. But what I found made my pulse quicken. There were bank statements linked to Harper's personal account, and several large deposits labeled partnership reimbursements. The amounts didn't make sense. They didn't match any legitimate business expenses. I cross-referenced them with the investor transfers I'd already analyzed. That's when it clicked. Harper had been skimming money from her fiancé Liam's investment and quietly transferring it into her personal savings. It was subtle. Smart, even. She'd waited for Cassie's fraudulent bookkeeping to create enough chaos that no one would ever notice her own small thefts hidden within the mess. While Cassie was out there creating shell companies, Harper was using Cassie's chaos as cover to quietly benefit. She wasn't just the betrayed partner, she was part of the problem, a parasite feeding off another parasite. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen, the weight of irony settling in. Harper had been so eager to point fingers, to act righteous. All the while, she'd been stealing too. Her mask of innocence was paper thin. All it needed was one spark to burn it away. I debated what to do with what I'd found. Part of me thought I should just walk away. I'd already achieved what I wanted. But another part, the colder, more calculating part, whispered that this was unfinished business. Harper had been there that night in the car. She'd laughed when Cassie drove off. She'd looked me in the eye through the rain and waved. That image never left me. If Cassie had learned what betrayal costs, then Harper deserved to learn it too. The next day, I started planning. I gathered the files quietly, labeling them neatly: personal transfers, investment trails, unauthorized withdrawals. I compiled everything into a single, airtight folder. It was enough to destroy her engagement, her credibility, and any lingering illusion of integrity she'd been hiding behind. But this time, I didn't send it to Harper. I sent it to Liam. I drafted an anonymous email, attaching the documents and a short message. "You should know where your investment really went. Ask Harper about these transfers. She'll know." I hesitated for only a second before clicking send. Then I sat back, closed my laptop, and waited. It didn't take long. Within 48 hours, Harper's world began to crumble quietly. Then, all at once, Liam moved out of their shared apartment. His family, who had once adored her, unfollowed her on social media. The engagement posts vanished. And then, the whispers started. People talked about how Liam had discovered financial discrepancies, how he'd ended things abruptly, how Harper had gone into hiding. She called me 3 days later, her voice hoarse and frantic. "Sienna," she said. "Liam's gone. He found something, some files. I don't even know where from. He thinks I stole from him." I kept my tone soft. "Did you?" Her silence stretched long enough to tell me everything. "Sienna," she said finally, her voice cracking. "I don't know how this happened. Cassie ruined everything. She made me look guilty." I almost laughed. The irony was exquisite. "Cassie's not the one Liam's angry at, Harper. He's angry at you." "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," she whispered. "That's what Cassie said too," I replied. She didn't answer. I could hear her breathing hard on the other end, trying to form a defense that didn't exist. Eventually, she hung up. That was the last time I ever heard her voice. News of their engagement ending spread fast. The same people who once sympathized with Harper now turned their pity into gossip. They said she'd used him, that she was no better than Cassie. Her pristine image cracked, and I didn't have to lift another finger. Brielle reached out to me a few days later, cautious but curious. "Do you know what happened with Harper and Liam?" she asked. I shrugged. "I heard something about money, but I don't know the details." She sighed. "It's sad. None of us are the same anymore." That, at least, was true. I spent the next few days in silence, finally feeling something close to peace. I hadn't screamed, I hadn't fought, I hadn't even confronted them face to face. I'd simply held up a mirror and let them see themselves for who they really were. When I checked Harper's social media, last time, her pages were gone. Deleted. No photos, no posts, no trace. Cassie's had been wiped too. The women who once flaunted their friendship online had disappeared, erased by their own choices. It should have felt satisfying. And in a way, it did. But there was a strange hollowness beneath it, like finishing a long, brutal story and realizing the ending wasn't victory, it was just silence. Still, I couldn't deny the poetic symmetry. The night they left me walking home alone had been the night I'd stopped being invisible. And now, they were the ones who'd been erased. For the first time, she knew what it felt like to be truly alone. I thought the chapter was over, but then the lawyers got involved. For weeks, I lived in silence, convinced that my story with them had finally ended. Cassie's business had collapsed. Harper's engagement was over. Their reputations were dust. They were both publicly ruined, and I thought that was enough. But life has a way of twisting endings into new beginnings, and mine came in the form of a letter. It arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipped under my apartment door in a thick white envelope stamped with the logo of a law firm I recognized from Cassie's old investor documents. I opened it slowly, half curious, half dreading what I might find. Inside was a subpoena. My name was listed as a potential witness in the ongoing civil dispute between Cassie Langford and Harper Doyle. I stared at it for a long time, the words blurring. It wasn't fear that I felt, it was inevitability. I had spent months weaving this web, pulling strings, and now the law had come to tug on them. They wanted to hear from the woman who had been in the middle of it all, the neutral party, who had designed their presentations and handled their files. I almost laughed at how perfectly it had all come full circle. I arrived at the law office 3 days later, calm and composed. The waiting area smelled of lemon polish and nerves. Cassie was already there, sitting stiffly in a dark blazer. Her hair was dull, her eyes ringed with sleeplessness. Across from her sat Harper, back straight, face cold, her lawyer whispering into her ear. They didn't even glance at each other. When they finally noticed me, Cassie's expression flickered recognition, anger, maybe fear. Harper's gaze lingered a moment longer, searching my face for something. Maybe she was wondering whose side I was on. I gave them both the same polite nod. I was called in to give my statement after them. The conference room was sterile, lit by harsh white lights. The lawyers spoke in low tones, every word measured, every silence heavy. They asked when I'd started working with Cassie, what access I had to company records, whether I'd ever noticed irregularities. I told them the truth, or at least the version of it that suited me. Yes, I said evenly. I noticed some inconsistencies in the invoices, but I assumed Cassie had her reasons. I wasn't handling finances. They asked about Harper. Did she ever seem aware of the transactions under her name? I paused for effect, as if choosing my words carefully. She trusted Cassie completely, I said. I don't think she knew what was going on. It wasn't a lie, not entirely. She hadn't known about Cassie's fraud, just her own. When they pressed me for documents, I produced a neatly organized USB drive containing everything I had: the original pitch decks, email threads, and correspondence Cassie had shared with me. I'd scrubbed them clean of any trace that linked back to my private copies or my earlier manipulations. Everything I gave them looked legitimate, untouched, undeniable. The lawyers examined the files, exchanged quiet looks, and whispered to their assistants. The energy in the room shifted. They could see the pattern now: the forged invoices, the self-payments disguised as vendor fees. Cassie's lawyer's expression darkened. Harper's lawyer smirked faintly. When I left the room, Cassie was waiting in the hallway. "You did this," she hissed under her breath. "You set me up." I tilted my head slightly. "Cassie, you're the one who sent me the files. I just handed over what I had." Her lip trembled. "You think this makes you better than me?" "I think it makes me honest," I said quietly. Harper walked past us then, her lawyer beside her. She didn't look at Cassie, but she did look at me, and for the briefest moment, I thought I saw gratitude in her eyes. It was fleeting, gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by exhaustion. Outside, the air felt crisp and clean. The sky was gray, but not heavy, with rain just muted. Still, I walked to my car slowly, each step echoing against the pavement, feeling that strange blend of satisfaction and melancholy again. A few days later, I heard the outcome. The lawyers had settled most of the dispute privately. Cassie's company was dissolved officially, her accounts seized to repay investors. Harper walked away without financial ruin, but with her name permanently stained by association. Neither woman came out victorious, both had lost far more than money. I heard through Brielle that Cassie had moved to Portland to start over. Harper stayed in town for a while but kept to herself, rarely seen at gatherings or events. Their names faded from conversation, replaced by new scandals and fresher gossip. But every so often, someone would mention that case, that whole Cassie and Harper thing, and my name would come up too. People would call me the only one who stayed clean. They didn't know the truth. They didn't know that I'd built the entire stage they'd destroyed each other on. I drove past the lawyer's office a week later, the same building where their fates had been sealed. I parked for a moment, staring at the glass doors where I'd watched them walk out. Cassie had been crying, shoulders shaking as she clutched her bag. Harper walked ahead, face blank, voice clipped as she spoke to her attorney. They didn't exchange a word. They didn't even look back at me. I remember thinking how poetic it all was. Months ago, they'd left me behind on a cold street without a thought. Now, they were walking out of those doors empty-handed, not just of money, but of dignity, friendship, and trust. I watched them until they disappeared down the sidewalk. Then I started my car, rolled down the window, and let the autumn air fill the silence. For the first time, it didn't feel heavy. It felt like closure. And when they walked out of that lawyer's office, both of them were empty-handed, exactly as I planned. Watching them lose everything didn't bring joy, it brought closure. The weeks following the settlement were quiet, eerily quiet. For months, my world had revolved around chaos, secrets, lies, strategy, and revenge. But now, the storm had passed. The phone stopped buzzing, the gossip threads went silent, and even my own mind finally felt still. It was strange, almost disorienting, to wake up without adrenaline humming under my skin. I'd done what I set out to do. They had learned. They had fallen. And now, I was free. The official outcome of their legal war became public soon after. The court ruled in favor of the investors, freezing both Cassie's and Harper's remaining accounts. Harper was forced to repay a portion of Liam's lost funds, though it was clear she didn't have enough to cover everything. Cassie, on the other hand, was effectively ruined, bankrupt, blacklisted, and burdened by civil penalties that would follow her for years. Neither of them ever recovered their reputations. I remember sitting at my kitchen table, reading the local business bulletin that summarized their downfall. The headline was simple: former business partners found liable for misuse of investor funds. There were no pictures, no sympathy quotes, just facts. Cold, clean, final. I thought I'd feel a rush of victory, a pulse of pride, maybe even satisfaction. But what I felt instead was a quiet, deep exhale, a release. The kind that comes after you've held your breath for too long. In the days that followed, my life began to fall back into a kind of normal rhythm. I returned to my freelance design work, taking on new clients and focusing on rebuilding the career I'd neglected while orchestrating my revenge. My inbox filled with fresh opportunities. My name carried no scandal, no stain. People saw me as reliable, efficient, trustworthy. The irony wasn't lost on me. One afternoon, while sketching mock-ups for a campaign, my phone buzzed. It was Brielle. I hadn't heard from her in weeks, not since the final court hearing. Her message was short. "You got what you wanted, huh?" I stared at it for a moment before typing back. I got what I deserved. She didn't reply after that, and she didn't need to. She wasn't accusing me, she was acknowledging the truth we both knew. The next weekend, I went out for a walk downtown. The weather was crisp, early autumn, the air full of the faint smell of roasted coffee and rain-soaked leaves. I passed by the cafe where Cassie had once begged me for advice, where she'd cried over her bad luck. The same cafe where I'd watched her lie through a trembling smile. It had new owners now, a fresh sign, and a different crowd. I stood across the street for a moment, remembering her face pressed against her coffee cup, the mascara streaks, the denial. For the first time, I didn't feel angry when I thought of her. Just indifferent. She had finally learned what happens when you treat people like pawns. And Harper, well, she had become a ghost. I saw her once, by chance, outside a small bookstore near the waterfront. She looked thinner, her hair shorter, her clothes simpler. She was alone, holding a paper cup of coffee, staring out at the gray water. She didn't notice me, and I didn't make myself known. I simply watched her for a few moments, remembering the sound of her laughter that night in the car, the echo of it as they drove away. The universe had a way of balancing things, and this, I realized, was balance. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't about punishing them. It was about closure. They had left me behind once, thinking I was harmless, forgettable, unimportant. But I had become the quiet consequence they never saw coming. Later that week, I received one last message and email from Cassie. I almost deleted it without reading, but curiosity got the better of me. It was short. Just a few sentences. "Sienna, I know you were part of it. I don't know how, but I know. You won. Congratulations. I hope it was worth it." I read it twice, then closed my laptop. I didn't respond. Because she was wrong, I hadn't won. There was no prize at the end of this story. There was only peace. And peace isn't loud or glorious. It's quiet. It's the absence of noise, of weight, of needing anyone's validation. In the months that followed, people stopped bringing up Cassie and Harper altogether. Their scandal became another cautionary tale whispered among small business owners, a story people told to remind themselves to be careful who they trust. But for me, it was never just a lesson. It was transformation. I started new projects, met new clients, and found myself slowly building something that felt honest, something that belonged entirely to me. No manipulation, no false friends, no hidden motives. Just me, my work, and the calm that comes when you've finally closed a door that should have been locked years ago. One night, as I was finishing a design draft, I got a message from a new client, a woman who'd been referred by someone who once worked with Cassie. She wrote, "I heard you're the one people call when they want things done." Right, I smiled at that. It was the first time in a long time that I felt proud of who I'd become, not as a weapon, but as a survivor. Before I went to bed that night, I looked out my window at the same street I'd once walked down in the rain, the same pavement that had carried me home when they left me behind. It looked different now. It wasn't a memory of pain anymore, it was proof of how far I'd come. I didn't hate them anymore. I didn't wish them harm. I just hoped they finally understood that cruelty has consequences, and silence doesn't mean weakness. They thought I got lucky, but luck had nothing to do with it. Even after it was over, the memory of that night still haunted me. No matter how much time passed, that night never really left me. Some memories don't fade, they linger, clinging to the corners of your mind like rain that never quite dries. Even now, when I walk home late or hear thunder rolling in the distance, I'm pulled back to that night under the flickering streetlight, drenched, humiliated, and alone. But instead of pain, I feel something else now, perspective. That night wasn't just the night they left me behind. It was the night I learned who I truly was when no one came to save me. For a long time after the settlement, I found myself replaying everything, not because I regretted it, but because I needed to understand it. Revenge isn't simple. It doesn't end with a single moment of triumph. It lingers, reshapes you, and forces you to look at yourself through a different lens. I didn't just punish them, I changed myself in the process. Sometimes, late at night, I would lie in bed staring at the ceiling, the rhythm of the rain against the window echoing like footsteps. I would see Cassie's smug smile, Harper's dismissive wave, and the way Brielle avoided eye contact that night. But now, those images didn't make me angry. They reminded me of what I'd overcome, what I'd rebuilt from. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about revenge for its own sake. It was about respect, self-respect. The kind they had stripped away from me when they laughed and drove off, thinking I wasn't worth the effort of a ride home. I used to think forgiveness was strength, that letting things go made you noble. But forgiveness, I learned, means nothing when it's given to people who don't see their own cruelty. There's a difference between letting go and moving on. Letting go means releasing the weight. Moving on means never picking it up again. I stopped checking their names online. I stopped wondering what became of them. I realized that constantly looking back was just another form of being trapped. I had spent too long letting their choices define me even after I'd taken control. So, one morning, I deleted everything. Every photo, every chat, every shared memory. It wasn't a ritual of anger. It was a cleansing. When my phone screen went blank and my inbox was empty, I felt an unexpected lightness. My apartment, once filled with the echoes of their laughter, finally felt like mine again. The walls that had once heard my tears now carried silence. But it was a peaceful one. I started to walk home from work intentionally, something I hadn't done since that night. At first, it felt strange. Every sound made me alert. Every corner reminded me of fear. But with each step, I reclaimed the road that had once symbolized abandonment. The city didn't feel threatening anymore. The rain didn't sting. It felt cleansing, like I was walking through the remnants of who I used to be. I remember one evening vividly. It had been raining for hours, a steady drizzle painting the streets silver. As I crossed the same intersection where they'd driven away, I stopped for a moment. I looked down at the pavement, remembering how my shoes had soaked through that night, how my hands had trembled from the cold. Then, slowly, I smiled. The fear was gone. That road no longer belonged to them. It belonged to me. Healing isn't loud. It's not a cinematic moment where music swells and everything clicks into place. It's quiet. It's drinking your coffee without bitterness. It's sleeping through the night without replaying old conversations. It's realizing you don't care anymore. I began to focus on small joys again, things that had nothing to do with them. The morning sunlight warming my kitchen table, the smell of fresh paper when I started a new design project, the soft hum of music while I worked late into the night. Those little things were proof that life continues, even after betrayal. Sometimes people think closure comes from confrontation, from hearing someone admit they were wrong. But real closure, I learned, comes from no longer needing that apology. From realizing that understanding why they hurt you doesn't change the fact that they did. Cassie and Harper had both vanished from my life completely. No messages, no sightings, no attempts at contact. For a while, I thought I might bump into one of them someday. But months turned into a year, and their absence became permanent. And honestly, that was the best outcome possible. Some endings don't need words, they just need distance. Every so often, when thunder rumbles in the distance, I'll pause and let myself remember not the pain, but the transformation. That night had taken something from me, yes, but it had also given something back: clarity. I no longer saw myself as the girl left behind. I saw myself as the woman who survived, adapted, and reclaimed her story. It's strange how something that once felt like my lowest point became the very foundation of my strength. I no longer walk with fear. I walk with awareness. I no longer let people's approval define my worth. I define it for myself. That night may have been my breaking point, but it was also my beginning. But deep down, I knew I'd never let anyone treat me that way again. Sometimes revenge isn't about destroying others, it's about reclaiming yourself. Time has a way of sanding down the rough edges of memory. A year after everything fell apart, I could finally look back without that sharp twist in my stomach. Cassie and Harper had become ghosts from another life, names people whispered about when they wanted to gossip, but not lives I felt tethered to anymore. What surprised me most wasn't their disappearance from my world, it was how easily I adjusted to life without them. I found a quiet rhythm again. My mornings started with coffee and sunlight instead of anxiety and checking my phone for their messages. I started taking design contracts that challenged me creatively. Small businesses, charities, even local artists who wanted branding that told a story. For the first time in years, I wasn't doing favors to earn friendship. I was working with people who valued me for my skill, not my loyalty. Each day felt like an act of reclamation. I bought new furniture, redecorated my apartment, and filled it with color. Not the muted tones Cassie used to mock, but bright, unapologetic hues that felt like life. My desk faced the window now, overlooking the same city that once felt suffocating. The rain still came often, but I didn't dread it anymore. When it fell, I opened the window and listened, not as a reminder of pain, but as a reminder that I'd survived it. People came and went in my orbit, as they always do, but the difference was in how I let them in. I no longer tried to impress anyone or bend myself into someone else's comfort. I said no when I wanted to. I spoke my mind even when it wasn't easy. And that, in its own quiet way, became my greatest revenge, being completely, unapologetically myself. Every once in a while, someone who knew the old group would bring them up casually. "Do you ever hear from Cassie or Harper?" they'd ask, curiosity softening their tone. I'd smile faintly and shake my head. "Not for a long time," I'd reply. That was all. No bitterness, no explanations, just distance, the most elegant form of closure there is. One evening, after finishing a client project, I received an email from a design magazine asking to feature my work in an upcoming issue. They said they'd seen my projects circulating online and admired the emotional storytelling behind my visuals. I sat there for a long time, reading the email over and over, realizing that I'd built something of my own from the ashes of betrayal. I wasn't the forgotten friend anymore. I was Sienna, known for her creativity, her independence, and her resilience. I decided to write back with a simple, "Thank you, I'd love that." And as soon as I hit send, I realized how symbolic it felt saying yes to something for me, without hesitation or fear of judgment. Brielle reached out a few months later. She'd moved to another state, started fresh. She sent a message saying she was proud of me, that she'd seen my name mentioned in the design community and thought I deserved every bit of recognition. I didn't know how to respond at first. Brielle had been the only one who ever showed even a hint of remorse for that night. I chose to forgive her quietly, without ceremony. We exchanged a few friendly messages, but nothing more. Some people are meant to pass through your life only once, leaving lessons behind rather than companionship. As time went on, I began to understand something deeper about what I'd done. Revenge had never really been about watching them fall. It was about standing tall again myself. It was about taking back the power they'd stripped away when they laughed and left me in the rain. By making them face the consequences of their actions, I'd freed myself from their hold not because I punished them, but because I refused to let their cruelty define who I became afterward. It's funny people think revenge always ends in destruction. But for me, it was rebirth. It forced me to rebuild every part of my identity, to look in the mirror and decide who I wanted to be without the approval of others. The version of me that walked home alone that night would have never imagined this, a life of calm, stability, and quiet pride. Now, when I talk about trust, I do so differently. I tell people that trust is earned, not owed. That kindness should never come at the expense of self-respect. That it's okay to walk away from people who only remember you when it's convenient. Because sometimes walking away is the most powerful thing you can do. I don't know what became of Cassie or Harper after the dust settled. Part of me hopes they found peace in their own way. Another part suspects they never did. But that's no longer my concern. Their chapter in my life is closed. And for the first time, I don't feel the need to read it again. A friend once asked me, "If you could go back, would you do it all over again?" I didn't hesitate before answering. "Yes," I said. Every step of it. Because revenge didn't destroy me, it rebuilt me. It taught me patience, restraint, and the quiet strength of letting the truth speak for itself. That night might have started with betrayal, but it ended with freedom. Not just from them, but from the version of myself that tolerated less than I deserved. I don't need validation anymore. I don't need apologies or closure from people incapable of giving it. I only need the peace I built with my own two hands. And that forgiveness, not revenge, was my true freedom. If I could go back, I'd still walk home that night because it led me here. Sometimes I still think about that night, not out of bitterness, but out of gratitude. The version of me who walked home alone, soaked and shivering, couldn't have imagined the woman I am now. She didn't know that being left behind would become her greatest turning point. Back then, I thought that pain was punishment. Now I see it was transformation. If I could go back to that restaurant, if I could stand outside again under that flickering streetlight and watch their car pull away, I wouldn't stop them. I'd let them leave. Because everything that came after, every heartbreak and revelation, every small victory, led me here. To peace, to purpose, to freedom. The life I've built since then isn't glamorous, but it's mine. I work for myself now, taking on clients who respect me and value my time. I choose projects that matter, not ones that drain me. My name carries quiet respect in circles that once overlooked me. I don't have to prove myself through other people's approval anymore. I just create, live, and breathe without fear. My home has become a sanctuary filled with soft light, warm colors, and silence that feels earned. Sometimes I sit by the window on rainy nights, watching droplets race down the glass, and think about how symbolic it all is. Rain used to mean loneliness. Now it feels like renewal. Every storm eventually passes, and what's left behind is clarity. The people who once left me behind taught me lessons they never intended to. Cassie taught me that charm without integrity is hollow. Harper taught me that pretending to be innocent doesn't erase guilt. And Brielle, she taught me that neutrality in the face of cruelty is its own kind of betrayal. But more than that, they collectively taught me that I don't need anyone to define my worth. There are moments when I wonder what I'd say if I ever ran into them again. Would I smile? Would I walk past without a word? I think I'd simply nod, not out of anger, but acknowledgement. We were all different people back then, shaped by our own selfishness, insecurities, and need for validation. Maybe they've changed, maybe they haven't. But the truth is, it doesn't matter anymore. I don't live for closure from them. I live for peace within myself. Last month, I attended a networking event for designers, a big one, the kind where people trade business cards and discuss upcoming projects. A woman approached me afterward, saying she'd heard of my work and admired the emotional storytelling behind it. "Your designs feel alive," she said. "There's something human in them." I smiled and thanked her. What she didn't realize was that every piece of art I make carries a fragment of my story. The heartbreak, the solitude, the rebirth, the parts of me that learned to rebuild after being broken. My work stopped being about perfection a long time ago. It became about truth. After the event, I walked home instead of calling a cab. The night was cool, the streets wet from a recent drizzle. The same streets that once terrified me now felt familiar, almost comforting. I passed the same corner store, the same cracked sidewalk, the same dimly lit crosswalk. Each step felt like retracing history, only this time, I wasn't the girl rushing to escape the darkness. I was walking through it with confidence, knowing I could face whatever came. There's a saying that every storm either breaks you or cleanses you. Mine did both. It broke who I was and cleansed who I became. Now, when people ask me why I'm so guarded, I just tell them, experience taught me to listen when people show you who they are. I don't say it with bitterness, but with calm certainty. Because trust isn't about being naive, it's about choosing wisely who deserves a seat at your table. I've learned that walking away doesn't mean weakness. Sometimes it's the bravest thing you can do. Walking away from friendships that take more than they give. Walking away from apologies that mean nothing. Walking away from the version of yourself that keeps accepting less. That night, I walked home alone, and it felt like an ending. Now, I know it was the beginning of everything that truly mattered. I no longer crave revenge or validation. I crave peace, quiet mornings, honest people, work that fulfills me, laughter that doesn't carry weight. I crave authenticity because I've lived through enough lies to know the cost of deception. There's beauty in surviving something that was meant to break you. Not because of the pain, but because of the growth it forces. I'm not thankful for what they did, but I'm thankful for what I learned because of it. If fate ever placed me at that same restaurant again, sitting across from those same faces, I think I'd smile genuinely. Not because I forgive everything, but because I no longer need to hold it. I'd raise my glass to the woman I've become, the one who walked home alone and came out stronger. That night used to be the story of how they left me behind. Now it's the story of how I found myself. The rain still falls, but it doesn't sting anymore. The road still stretches endlessly ahead, but now it feels like a path instead of a punishment. So yes, if I could go back, I'd still walk home that night. Because every step through the rain led me here to strength, to peace, to a life I built with my own two hands. And when I see them now, struggling to rebuild what they lost, I know justice walked beside me that night.